Well, welcome to another episode of the Achieve and Enjoy podcast. My name is Matt Harriman, and on this podcast, we explore the relationship between work and happiness. And today I've got Connor Gillan with me. Connor, who are you? Where'd you come from?
That's a great question. Connor Gillan, like you mentioned. So right now I'm in treasury at a big tech company. Prior to that, I've had several interesting roles. One directly prior to this at a small credit union in treasury, which was where I got my foot in the door there.
So, for people that don't understand what Treasury is, like myself included, can you explain it like I'm five?
The best way to describe it is kind of the nerve center of any finance organization. Because basically the company is not going to function if cash isn't being paid, and everybody likes to get their paycheck on time. And that kind of falls on treasury to make sure the money goes to the right place and in a controlled manner. So that's kind of the baseline. And then as you go to bigger companies or even at the small credit union, any cash that's kind of above and beyond the needs of the business, you need to find a place to either deploy it or like invest it, finding opportunities like that. So that adds a layer of complexity into that. And then if you go like at the company I'm at now, a big multinational company that has operations across the globe, you have exposure to different currencies. So you have to manage, I guess, trading the currency and hedging your risk in markets can get pretty broad and interesting, and then get as basic and simple as making sure cash goes from A to B.
Right. Money in, money out at the simplest, but it's, there's a million layers of complexity that make that harder underneath it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's a good way to describe it. Prior to that was at everyone's favorite Swiss bank, Credit Suisse. Did some ops roles and some, I guess, regulatory. I like to call it internal consulting. It was regulatory reporting kind of stuff for Dodd-Frank and those kind of regulations. Had an interesting path. For college, I went to UNC Wilmington, so got to spend 4 fun years down on the North Carolina beach. It was very nice.
I've heard really good things about like the Carolinas and that East Coast area. What's it like out there? I've never been though. What's it like?
I would say the Carolina beaches are probably one of my favorite on the East Coast, especially. The sand's nice. The waves are good enough to surf some,
Mm.
but not like those videos you've seen where it's like 30, 40 foot barrels that would take years off of my life, even attempting to try to surf any of those. But
Yeah.
I loved them. It was awesome.
Yeah, it's gotta be a good location for college. A lot better than my experience in like middle of nowhere, North Texas. Like 2 hours
Yeah,
from Wichita Falls was not is not an
that's
exciting
the
spot to be.
that's the closest place to go to have the big city experience.
Yeah, that's where to go, like, if you wanna go somewhere other than Walmart. Um, we had fun, though. Alright, sorry, I interrupted, keep going.
No worries. He did that. Prior to that, lived in New Mexico, was born in Idaho, actually. Moved from there when I was one or so, so don't remember much of it. Moved to New Mexico, lived there for 10, 12 years, and then moved to North Carolina in '06, '07, and had been in the Raleigh area, except for college, ever since. Crazy how fast and how much it's grown, even over the last couple years, just with everybody moving.
How big of a town in, New Mexico did you come from?
It was a couple 100,000 people, so it's Las
Okay.
Cruces, New
Oh, yeah.
Mexico. Yeah.
Gotcha, so not too small. So, moving to
No.
Raleigh wasn't like a huge culture shock or anything then?
I would say it was a decent culture shock. It was interesting. It was the summer between 7th and 8th grade, so kind of a weird time to move.
Mm. Right before high school. Yeah.
Yeah, right before high school, and it was just a change, like, culturally a little bit, and then just kinda geographically. Going from the desert where the tallest tree is, like, a couple feet tall, basically, to basically living in a pine forest.
Let's talk through the career a little bit. So you got to college, and what did you major in college?
So I started off in econ because so my brother was a econ major. He's 10 or 11 years older than me. So he's technically my half brother, but always called him my brother. So wanted to follow in his footsteps, decided to go econ, kind of got bored with that after the first one or two classes. Then I switched to marketing with a concentration in sales, did that for a little bit. And then I realized I didn't like talking to people all that much. And especially trying to convince them to buy a product or service. So then kind of fell back into, I guess, your traditional businessy kind of things and went the route of finance. And that was kind of just because it was what was the easiest thing for me to do. I always was really good at math, like conceptually understood numbers. So I like investments and investing. So kind of just defaulted back to finance.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life in college, as I think most people don't. And so I always had that natural, like, aptitude for math, and it led me like, I leaned closer to the technical side, like mathematics. My degree was in math, and it would have been in engineering had I gone to a bigger school. So it was the investing, like, you had some interest in investing at that time? Where did that come from?
I guess from the earliest stage, it was one of my grandparents, like for every birthday or like milestone, would give me like a share or two of the company's stock.
Interesting.
So being a very young kid, as young kids tend to do, the first stock I picked was Toys R Us
Yep.
because I like toys and I liked going to Toys R Us to pick out toys. I
Yeah.
was like, I think that's a great company. They ended up going out of business, obviously, went
Yeah.
bankrupt, but I think we got out of that before all that happened and ended up picking some other stocks, one of which was Exxon, since I had a lot of oil and gas in the family.
I don't think I was even aware of the stock market until, like, I got my first real job at, like, 22, 23. So that's cool. That's interesting how, like, a little thing like your grandparents giving you a stock could lead to going a different angle on mathematics in college.
Yeah, it was interesting because I guess part of it was just the ownership of business was kind of a cool concept. Like as a 5 or 6 year old, 7 year old, I'm like, I own Toys R Us.
Right.
A very minimal fraction of it, but
You can
like
use that as leverage on your parents too, right? Like, "Hey, every dollar we spend there, like, we're actually getting a piece."
yeah, yeah, that's a good good point. I didn't even think about that.
So, you ended up with the degree, you said finance, right?
Yeah,
Was
yeah.
was where you landed on, and what was that like? Like, what was studying that like? What was the course load like? What were other people thinking of trying to go into after?
The course load to me was very easy. Yes, I was always one of those kids, even in high school and middle school, like I barely had to study. Like I could flip through something a couple minutes before a test and then go in and be fine. So that was kind of a double-edged sword in a way. But I guess the career path of it was people wanted to go into like investment banking or investment or I guess finance at a big company. I was leaning towards the like investment banking, investments side of things, at least after I graduated.
What did your parents do for work?
My dad, he was a professor basically my whole life. Prior to that, he was so he's a psychology professor focused in like human system interaction. So like how people interact with computers,
Mm,
computer
interesting.
systems. So he worked at like Lockheed Martin and NASA and even like Kraft Foods for a
Yeah.
while. He did that. And then my mom, she was a dentist my whole life, but prior to that, she was a food scientist and an engineer for a little bit, I think, too.
That's an interesting transition.
Yeah. Yeah. So she has always said she loved school. And if she could get paid to go back to school, she would. So I guess just kind of the natural curiosity there. But
Yeah.
she worked at NASA on the space food science program for a while. And that's actually where my parents met was at NASA. So
Interesting. So what did they think of your, like, career path and, major and all that kinda stuff?
they were always super supportive. I think they just wanted me to pursue something that obviously would be able to get a good job afterward. So I think if I would have gone like an acting or creative writing path, they might have been a little more hesitant
Mm,
towards it, but they were always super supportive about it.
gotcha. So when we talked last time, you mentioned, you kind of felt like a failure in like comparing to them, and like in their, you know, roles or things like that. Can you explain like where that feeling came from?
Yeah, I guess at times it felt like I wasn't living up to my potential because like my mom has a master's in food science and a DDS, so I guess doctorate in dental science or something. I
Hmm.
can't remember what it stands for. And then my dad has a PhD from UT in psychology. My half brother has his JD from a law school out in California. Russell, who you had on before,
Hmm.
is my cousin actually. So he has his MBA and I think a master's in petroleum engineering. It just I guess felt like I wasn't living up to my potential by getting those extra degrees and kind of not. Yeah, I guess that's why it would be more feeling like a failure away in a ways.
Did that come from anybody else, or was that totally you making those comparisons and
Oh
feeling?
no, it was completely internal. Like no one
Yeah,
else, everyone else has always been so much of a bigger cheerleader for me
yeah.
to be myself. But yeah, everyone always kind of was really supportive of the path I was going and said I was doing everything right, I guess, and being successful in my own way, which was, I guess, kind of a traditional way.
How how has that kind of internal monologue changed over time? Have you like has it gotten better? You still wrestle with it quite a bit, or how's that like developed over time?
I think it's definitely gotten better just as I've gotten more comfortable and more experienced in my own career and seen the advancement that I've been able to achieve so far that I think it's kind of lessened and I've proved it to myself in a
Hmm.
ways. And I didn't go back and get an MBA yet. It's definitely still something I'm kind of kicking around in my mind is something that would be interesting to do. But
Yeah.
I went and got the CFA, so the Chartered Financial Analyst credential, which honestly opened a ton of doors job wise, but kind of taking that as a different path of showing myself that I wasn't actually a failure and kind of could do whatever I put my mind to.
Whenever I think about failure, I think about the opposite of it. So what is success? And so I think it's easy, especially for people that are, hard on themselves to feel like a failure or to count something as a failure. I know I do that a lot. How would you define, call it career success?
That's a great question. And I'm not entirely sure I know the answer to that. I guess part of it would just be career progression. So
Mm,
like getting those promotions and more responsibility and more, I guess, more feathers in your cap, for lack of a better analogy.
like how much have you thought about, this might sound weird, but like life success. So obviously career success is kind of a portion, but a pretty big portion of what would you want your life to turn out like? Like if you look back when you're on your deathbed and say like, yeah, I've had a successful life, what would that mean?
That's an even better and deeper question that I'm still kind of working through. I think part of it is, yeah, I want to be successful in my career, but also having built a loving and supportive and well functioning family and having leveraged the career success to be able to provide freedom and experiences and that kind of thing from the life side. So like traveling or experiencing new hobbies or just that kind of thing.
I'm sorry if we're going like super deep on this shit, but like I think it's been super impactful for me to think about like what is the role that work plays in my life. And I think a lot of people could benefit from really thinking through, why do I work? and like what is the point of my career? What is a successful career? And that answer changes over time too. For me, early on, and even just a few years ago, my only answer whenever somebody asked me, like, what do you want out of your career? Where do you want to go in 5 years? All those kind of questions, it was more. Like, I want more impact, more responsibility, more money. Like, I just want more. And then over the last few years, it's changed where I've been able to define what enough is on the money front, especially, and say, if I can have that much money, then I want to optimize for my life experience and my impact on other people, like especially my family, but also others. Those questions of what is the purpose of work in my life? What would a successful career like look like? What would a successful life look like? I really like thinking on and meditating on those questions. It's brought me a lot of clarity for sure.
Yeah, that's a good way to frame it and think about it. And yeah, I like the way that you framed it as it kind of shifts. So like early in your career, it's kind of the more just taking on anything and everything and getting to that point of whenever you, I guess for lack of a better word, settle down. And
Mm,
then that's kind of when the shift happens and you start optimizing for time or family or experiences and that kind of thing.
yeah. I think different things for different people and at different times too. So I think that awareness of and just being somewhat aware of like why you're doing what you're doing. Because I went a little too far down the career ladder kind of trap where okay, I get a promotion and a raise, want another one. Like the length of time that a promotion or raise would keep me satisfied kept shortening and shortening. So as I got one, I'm like, I'm not super content or happy. I want more and more. And I think that's a if you want to have a well balanced life and you want to put a lot of energy into family, I feel like that's a dangerous treadmill to get on.
Yeah, I agree. I think I can definitely relate to that. So I
Mm,
having just gotten promoted, I guess 2.5 months ago now, the luster of it kind of wore off a little quicker than I was expecting and kind of
yeah.
just fell back into the okay, what's next? And yeah, just being aware of that is interesting and kind of makes you think a little bit more of like why why do you want to know what's next? Like why not just savor it and enjoy it and keep building that?
I think there's a misconception around like somebody being content and being satisfied. I think it doesn't imply complacency. I think a lot of people hear like be happy where you're at or enjoy the ride and they think of somebody either lazy or complacent or not trying to achieve more. I see it as kind of a reduction of the mental like anguish of like wanting things to be different than they are. I know I've found that I've been able to release a lot of pressure on myself in that and kind of yes, I still have different, goals and places that I want to get to and all of that stuff, but I'm also accepting of where I am on that ride like now. And so it's not as I don't know, I'm not gritting my teeth as much. I think is
Yeah.
is is a way to describe it.
Yeah, and you're not in that cycle of being on the hedonic treadmill too, of like always pushing and kind of forcing the movement.
Walk through kind of your professional experience a little bit. So you're at a couple of like a big bank and a big tech company. Can you talk about how those have been different experiences?
First off, at the big bank, it was obviously like a big bank culture. I guess they kind of not preached, but kind of wanted people to buy into the corporate culture and follow the path of the people before you, that kind
Mm,
of thing, where you had to kind of do your time in the role and do that. And it wasn't as, I guess, entrepreneurial is one word that comes to
mm.
mind.
Kind of do your job and then you do your job long enough, then you get the next job and then you need to do that one and not as much freedom.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely say so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of that more structured and like promotion cycles were super structured. And if you got passed over 1 year, it was like a whole year before a promotion would even be back on the table again. I think that's where I kind of got not caught, but it opened my eyes after we had a couple of people leave and I took on a bunch more work. And I was basically doing the work of like two or three people who were more senior than me. And I got passed over for a promotion and it was kind of like, oh, we'll get you next year. And it was like, I don't really want to wait another whole year of doing three people's jobs and not being paid for doing three people's jobs. So that kind of opened my eyes a little bit. And I was like, let's see what else is out there. And at that time, I was going through the CFA program. So studying and realizing that it opened some doors to me. So that got me into treasury, which honestly, if you would have asked me in college or first couple of years what a treasury team did, would have had absolutely no idea. Didn't even know of it as a career path, but I got the opportunity at the credit union, which was kind of a culture shock going from a big bank to a tiny institution. And they were super conservative.
Like how
Um,
small? How many people?
um, I think it was maybe 60 or 70
Okay.
across the whole organization. Like my employee number was like 652 or
Okay.
something like that. They started from one back
Right.
in like 1980 or something. So they had 600 people over 20 years.
Yeah. So not even like a percent of Credit Suisse.
Yeah, it would be a rounding error for their HR department.
Yeah. So what was that transition like, and what was it like there?
It was an interesting transition. When I first started there, I would write like a monthly note, and after different Fed meetings and stuff, I would write a little recap that would go to the CEO, CFO, the president of the credit union. So that was really cool to get that exposure and see that these people with C-level titles or president titles were actually real people too, and needed the work of somebody like me as an analyst to help them in their decisions. That was really cool to get that level of exposure and kind of visibility to senior level people and see that they were just kind of normal everyday people.
Was it that kind of, I guess, control and bureaucracy that you had at the big bank? Was it the same there, or was it different? How was it?
I would say it was different in a way. So there would be different projects and initiatives and stuff to work on, but a lot of the time I would go into presentation after working on a project for a couple of months, and I could tell from the second I stepped in the room, everybody had their mind made up, and it kind of wasn't going to get any traction at all. That was tough and kind of would kill motivation sometimes. And my boss at the time did a really good job of managing that kind of disappointment and frustration
Mhm.
by just saying, yeah, it might not get traction here or get traction now, but you have built those skills and learned that experience that you might be able to leverage it elsewhere. Or
Mhm.
if things change and they end up deciding to go with it, you can spearhead that.
Yeah, I've run into that kind of situation where, like, there's good ideas, and those ideas have to find the right time and place for them to, like, to work, and so places where, like, in former spots in my career, I've run into brick walls with what I knew was a great idea, and it just didn't happen or didn't work or whatever. Like, eventually it turns into something else. Like, a big part of our business is a bunch of ideas that we had back in like 2014 and 15 that for a bunch of reasons just didn't happen. And yeah, so I mean, we're building a business based on those ideas from 9 years ago now. So I think your boss at the time, that was pretty wise. I wish I had heard more stuff like that whenever I was running into brick walls, but that, that is good work still, and even if it doesn't get across the line, you're building skills, you're developing an idea, like stuff like that. That's cool.
I really appreciated his advice and support. He honestly made leaving that job really difficult to do. It took an offer that was basically too good to turn down to leave. And it ended up the timing of it ended up being better than I could have even imagined because he ended up leaving like 2 months later to take like
So
a promotion out, essentially changing jobs to get a promotion.
yeah, did he make it hard on you to leave at the end also? Like, did he try to convince you to stay a bunch and or do anything that way, or just the fact that he was a really good boss?
No, it was just the fact he was a really good boss. He was super understanding and appreciative of the fact that it was too good of an opportunity to turn down.
I had a boss at one point that I really, really learned a ton from. Like, spent a lot of time with him. He mentored me on all kinds of stuff. And then when I quit, he was just a total dick. Like, he was like mad at me for for leaving. Like, he disagreed with the decision, and that's fine. That's one thing, but he acted like a child. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that kind of wrecked that relationship from my side forever. I don't know how he feels because I don't want to talk to him, but
Yeah, I would imagine that would kind of solidify the like reasons for leaving in my mind of like, yeah, I'm actually making a really good choice by
yeah,
taking this new step.
it felt like I had like cheated on him or something. It was just like a 180. I don't know. It was stupid. You left the smaller credit union, and then did you go straight to NetApp after that?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So how did that opportunity come up, and how was that transition, and how's it gone?
So the opportunity came up because I was just feeling kind of stuck and bored at the credit union and was looking at other opportunities in the area and honestly just found it on LinkedIn and applied and didn't think I would hear back, but ended up getting the interviews and got the job. Started it like 2 weeks after getting married. So that was, I guess, taking all of the life changing events and lumping them into a couple month period. Because a couple months prior to that, we moved houses. So we sold a house and bought a house and moved and then got married. And my wife was in graduate school at the time. So she was doing a master's program and got married, did basically everything all at once. It was a really great opportunity, even from like the first couple of days. I got to hit the ground running and built out an in-house investment program over the course of, I think, my first 3 months being here. And we built that up to, I think it was over $750 million of investments
Mm.
as of our fiscal year end back in April.
I can guess, but what's an in-house investment program look like? What is
So
that? What does it look like?
basically was just building out the ability to trade securities and buy them and kind of have all the plumbing and pipes put together so that we didn't have to outsource those investments and we could make them ourselves and didn't have to pay management fees or even with like a money market fund, you're still paying some
Mm.
management fees there. So
And this is at a tech company, so this is for, cash on hand that you don't have to use right now, and using that to invest and get a return on.
yeah. Yeah. So it's just
Okay.
using the cash that's just sitting around and we have it for various opportunities. Like if we wanted to buy a company or pay a dividend or buy back shares or stuff like that, it's there to do that. And it's been generated by the business, but it hasn't found an end home. So it's kind of
Right.
just putting
Yeah,
that
it's
to
not.
work to earn something above what banks pay. And a lot of the times banks are paying about what you get on your checking or savings account to corporate. Sometimes it's a little better and you can negotiate that, but still it's not what you can do in markets at times, even with the super conservative kind of plain vanilla investment program.
Right. So how involved are, the company executives in what decisions are made within that investment program? Is there a manager of it that, effectively runs all the decisions and then, reports to execs as any other would, or how's it work?
It's a little bit of both. There's some input from execs, kind of what they want to see from the cash, like timing of when they think they'll need it. And
Mhm.
then after that, it kind of just falls down to me and my boss to figure out the right kind of risk profile that we have and then allocating from there. And ours has been super super simple and super basic. It's all US Treasuries. So it's kind of the safest of the safe.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I would imagine that you wouldn't want to get too risky with non-core like profit generating stuff, right? Because like you wouldn't want to wreck part of the business by getting too risky with your investment program or not
Yeah.
having the capital to buy a business when you need to or stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. It would be bad to take losses on that cash. I think that would kind of, I don't know if I'd get fired for it, but it probably put me close to there.
Yeah, there'd be a conversation about it. I don't know. I learned a bit about like leveraging and the risk profiles with the whole Silicon Valley Bank stuff and how they kind of manage their cash and everything. That was a teachable moment, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, that was definitely an interesting time to be in our world.
I want to switch gears a little bit. Um, One thing that you mentioned is that you're married to a therapist, and I'm connecting the dots that your dad was a PhD in psychology. So that's 2 people in your life that have been close to you that are probably just totally in your fucking head. I'm assuming, but maybe not. What's that been like?
Interesting. Cool at times, and sometimes it can be the most frustrating thing in the world when you're about something or frustrated and you get talked to by a therapist like a therapist, and it's like, I don't need a therapist right now. I need to just be mad.
Yeah.
Like, why do you feel that way? Or like, what really is happening? And it's like, I just want to be mad.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not ready to process this. I'm in the middle of it. Was there any with your dad having the PhD in psychology, what was that like?
He was never really that kind of psychologist, I don't think.
Okay.
It was more, he did more of like computer systems design and robotic stuff. So it was more like kind of, I guess, a blend of psychology and engineering. So it was like how people perceive things and like perception and cognition and like that kind of stuff. So it's more of how the brain works systematically as opposed to like emotionally.
Yeah, so it was more technical almost than he wasn't a practicing psychologist, like, working with individuals or things like that, right? It was
Right.
more sciency, I guess.
Yeah.
And with your wife being a therapist, what good do you think has come from that? Because I'm sure there's benefits to it also. I can imagine the being coached when you really don't want to be. And I can imagine how frustrating that could be sometimes, but how about the plus sides of it?
I think the plus sides of it are it's kind of the same as the frustrating side, but in bigger picture view of it, where like just having the openness to talk about emotions and kind of take that layer deeper. If you would ask me a decade ago if I would be going to therapy, I think I would have probably punched you in the face, said some pretty not nice things, but I myself have started seeing somebody like a therapist on a pretty regular basis, just as a good outlet to have a neutral third party to bounce things off of. And I don't think I ever would have been pushed to take that leap if I wasn't married to a therapist.
That's a good point, and I see a therapist regularly too, and like you, I think I used to have the whole stupid tough guy mindset of, like, therapies for weak, emotional people, and I'm not one of those, and and all that kinda just stupid stuff that you grow up with for different reasons. But, yeah, mine's been super helpful, and I see them kind of as it's like any other kind of specialist. So, like, if you go to physical therapy for an injury or you see a trainer for, whatever, or you see a golf coach or whatever, this is just a different one that works on your mind. Um, and the one that I've got, she's super cool. So she's a combination of therapist and executive coach. And so, like, depending on if I'm going through some shit that has some seeds from my childhood, like, we can go there and, like, process things. But if I'm generally good and I'm trying to think about strategy with the business or unlocking some better, like, performance out of myself or things like that, she's got that gear also. That's been super helpful. What have you gained from therapy? Like, what's your experience been like with it?
It's been just super helpful kind of having me take a step outside of my own personal, like kind of reframing things to see why miscommunications happen or like why something would be frustrating to me, but like not be landing. It's just kind of the openness to perspectives.
How long have you been doing it for?
Like 6, 9 months
Okay.
where I'm there.
Yeah, I think everybody could benefit from it, and that's a privileged thing to like have the means to be able to do it. But it's really been helpful for me. So for anybody listening, like if you're on the fence, like try it out. If nothing else, like it's good to have somebody that their job is to listen to you. And even if like I found like some of my sessions are, it really is just me like processing my own stuff, and she hardly does anything. She'll prod me in like little ways, but it's like just me sorting things out. And even those sessions are super valuable.
I agree. I think when I first started doing it, I said I was therapy curious because I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it or if I would find it beneficial. So I was like, I'll do it a couple of times and see. But yeah, I think it's worth trying, and you may have to go through a couple of different providers to find the right fit. But it's good to do, and even if it's once a month or once every other month, just good to kind of have a little check in and tune up because, like you said, it's kind of a specialist for your brain, which is kind of the key function of being
Kind
a
of
human.
important. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
somewhat important. Shortly after beginning to see a therapist, I had a pretty nasty encounter with depression. But leading up to that, I think what led to me starting to see the therapist was there was just something off. Like my behavior wasn't right, like my mind wasn't right, like I was just doing stuff that wasn't awesome that I wanted to change, and I had trouble changing like my behaviors in a way that I hadn't before. And so that was kind of my trigger for it. Was there for you, was there something that pushed you over the edge to say, "Okay, I wanna start seeing a therapist," or, like, how did you land on that decision to try it?
Some of it was just having been poked or prodded enough times by my wife to just say, okay, fine, I'll go and do it. But it was kind of just balancing the stress of being a newlywed, having just changed jobs, taking on responsibility in that job and kind of building and growing that, and kind of just caved and said, yeah, I think it would be a good thing to do to, even if for nothing, just give it a try and have that outlet as a different avenue.
And even, like, the word you just used, like, I caved in and or I caved and did it, like, that even has, like, a negative connotation with it, and so, like, that shit is just deep in us, and I'm sure I said, like, the same thing, but I think I've really reframed it in my mind to be, like, it's taking care of myself, and like you said, your brain is kind of an important part of you, and so
Just a little bit.
yeah, yeah, spending an hour a month or whatever on it is probably worth it. Have you ever encountered any kind of like you talked about a few times where like you were doing three people's jobs and like some other stressful parts. Have you ever felt what you would call burnout?
I would say somewhat. I don't know if like in the traditional sense of burnout, but there have definitely been times where I've kind of just hit a wall and been like, I'm kind of just gonna slack off for a while. And I think that's kind of the sign to myself where I'm like, okay, you might need to take the foot off the gas pedal for a little bit. And those times are probably when I have been slacking on therapy or journaling and stuff like that, or even just going to the gym and going for a run. Yeah, when I let all that stuff start slipping, and I can definitely start feeling it.
What does burnout feel like to you?
I guess to me, it's kind of like just an overall lack of motivation. So it's like everything's kind of just very blah, just
Mm.
kind of not getting that same spice of life and not feeling like invigorated to tackle the day.
Have you noticed any changes in either mindset, mood, or behavior leading up to a burnout? Are there any warning signs?
I guess I would say probably feeling super on edge. When I start getting frustrated by like the littlest inconvenience, I'm like, okay, maybe it's time to take a step back for a second and see what's causing that. And yeah, it's typically kind of that ramp up to hitting that full on burnt out feeling.
I've felt the exact same thing. There's a tension and irritability that then kind of precludes the burnout, and my burnout is similar where I just don't give a shit. It's basically me throwing a tantrum at myself for like working myself too hard, or not enough breaks or rest or play or whatever it is. Like when I notice that tension and that irritability starting, like kind of ramping up the time outside or the exercise or try things like that. Or sometimes oddly enough, like one thing that works for me is staying up just super late alone and just doing whatever. Like, it could be writing or reading or watching TV or like whatever, but just one thing that gives me it feels like I have a little bit of control is just like a few unstructured hours of just time to myself. I think they call it revenge bedtime procrastination now.
Yeah,
That's a term that got thrown around, and I relate to that a bit. Sometimes those coping mechanisms are useful, though.
they're definitely useful, but when you stack too many of those, it can lead to some other things that aren't so great. But I think even the healthiest coping mechanism, it can be unhealthy one because everything's about moderation.
Yeah,
Like exercise is great, but if you go to the gym for 12 hours a day, you're probably gonna have other issues.
I know a guy like that. Just that's his escape from his family and his life and all that stuff, and things aren't going well in any other area than his bench press, like max. But what do you think of the future of your career? And we've talked about burnout, and we've talked about kind of like how you got to where you are, and success and failure and some of that stuff. Like, what are you thinking for the future?
So one thing I'm really looking forward to is stepping into a management position. Got promoted, like I said, a couple months ago, and we're hiring somebody on who's backfilling for my old role, basically, because I stepped into the guy who was above me who retired. So we're bringing somebody younger on. So I guess being in that management role and helping to guide somebody and provide that mentorship, something
Mhm.
that is really appealing to me, but also kind of scares the daylights out of me a little bit. Just as I guess it's kind of just something new and unknown, and that's a scary piece of it. But I think at the end
Yeah.
of the day, it'll be really exciting and interesting to do and take that new step a little bit.
That's an exciting and anxiety riddled time for sure. The first management job it can be tough, but I think if you give a shit about the people and you are personally like effective and productive, that you'll be fine, right? It's
Yeah,
like the caring about the people part can be tough. Like there's a lot of pressures on middle and like frontline managers and stuff to do things that kind of suck for their people, but you do your best to manage both of those and find the balance of what's right for the business and what's right for the people, and I think that's all you can do.
that's a good way to put it. Kind of managing both up and down of managing expectations from the top and then managing those expectations from your people. Like, yeah, we may have something that just sucks and there's no way to get around it. But at the end of the day, that just being with them in that suck and not just being like, here, it's yours, deal with it. Sorry. Yeah, I think just being empathetic. I know this sucks and we can try to do what we can to make it suck a little less. Or if it has to suck a lot, then we'll figure out a way to do something else once it's done that will be a little more enjoyable.
Yeah. Let's go to the bar and do it while we have to. If we're going to be miserable, let's do it in a fun place or something. But
Yeah.
there's never going to be like a perfect overlap of exactly what the individual wants for themselves and their career and their skill development and their time and their personal life and all that stuff, and what the business needs from them. But the more you can identify where they overlap and understand where they don't, and do your best to like avoid that stuff, I found is super helpful. One thing that really surprised me was at the time just super stupid and unaware of most things in the world. Like how big an impact people's like personal lives should be considered at work. Like people going through serious stuff at home, or even just hectic life things like new kids, moving, buying a house, like relationships, all that stuff. Like I know people really, really appreciated it when I was mindful of those things. with their workload and stuff like that. Like I remember having conversations with people and they'd say like, "Hey, I've got about 60% this week or less or whatever." And be like, "Okay, like we can manage that. We can work with it." And I think just treating people like humans is generally a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I heard something on, I think, Tim Ferriss's podcast with Brene Brown, where she was talking about it more in relationships, where her and her husband would say, I have X percent, and
Oh yeah.
then expect other person to either be able to meet for 100%, or like they would talk about what they could do. And maybe it was not have a serious discussion if they can't get to 100% or something along those
Yeah.
lines. But I think reframing that in the way of managing is still super useful, kind of understanding where other people are coming from.
Yeah. I saw that clip and I sent it to my wife because they'll do I think if the sum of both parts isn't 100%, then they have a conversation about how we're not gonna be dicks to each other. Like,
Yeah,
if
that's
if
what it
if
was.
we're both struggling, like, how do we make sure that we don't fight? Because I know, like, with my wife, if one or both of us is in a good mental state, we got enough sleep, like, all that kinda stuff, then, like, we're good. We'll have stress, but we'll be able to deal with it and whatever, but if we're both down for whatever reason, be it work or kids or sleep or whatever, that's when it can get dicey, and so being intentional about that stuff is super helpful. It's cool. Well, I think this has been super interesting. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Man, this has been good to get to know you better through this and I think a lot of people that'll be able to relate to a bunch of pieces of your story and what you've gone through. Before I do our sign offy kind of things, is there anything else you want to, share with people, you want to say?
I don't know. I guess just be good to people. Just understand people are dealing with their own stuff, and just do what you can do to not add to it. Try to make every room you're in a little bit better for having you in it.
Oh, that's really well said. Especially in business, a lot of the problems come when we put on our robot business faces and just do weird shit that humans don't do. Well, thanks again, Connor. Really enjoyed this conversation. Again, this was another episode of Achieve and Enjoy. Subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter. Connor's on LinkedIn. I'm sure people can find you there, and we'll
Yeah.
put the link in the show notes and all that stuff. Yeah, and I hope you enjoy your work this week.